The shadow in the server room. Nora Bennett had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. At 26 years old, she arrived at Sterling Tech Solutions every morning at 7:30, a full hour before anyone else. She wore the same uniform of invisibility, baggy hoodies in various shades of grey, loose cargo pants that hung from her hips, and worn sneakers that made no sound against the polished concrete floors. Her dark blonde hair stayed hidden under a baseball cap, and she never made eye contact with anyone in the elevator. Sterling Tech occupied a sleek glass building in downtown Seattle, known for developing cutting-edge cybersecurity software that protected Fortune 500 companies. The office buzzed with young programmers, all competing for recognition and advancement. Nora wanted neither. She wanted to write beautiful code in peace, to solve impossible problems with elegant solutions, and to go home without anyone remembering she existed. The theft that everyone ignored. A workspace was tucked in the back corner of the development floor, a small desk surrounded by servers that hummed constantly. Most people found the noise irritating, but Nora loved it. The mechanical symphony meant she could work undisturbed, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she built algorithms that would make other programmers weep with envy. Every Friday, Nora submitted her weekly projects to her direct supervisor, Richard Grant, a man in his early 40s who wore expensive suits and spoke loudly about innovation he never actually created. Richard had been with Sterling Tech for 8 years and knew exactly how to play corporate politics. He would take Nora's code, review it thoroughly to understand what she had built, then present it in Monday morning meetings as his own breakthrough work. The first time it happened, Nora had been too shocked to speak. She sat in the back of the conference room, watching Richard explain her revolutionary approach to encryption as though he had spent sleepless nights developing it. She waited for someone to question him, to ask about the original files, but nobody did. Richard was charming and confident, and everyone believed him. The weight of past mistakes. Nora had learned this survival strategy the hard way. At her first job after college, working for a startup in Portland, she had been young and naive enough to believe that talent alone mattered. She dressed normally, wore her hair down, and spoke up in meetings about her ideas. Within 3 months, the company's founder, a man twice her age, began making comments about her appearance. He would stand too close, suggest private mentoring sessions, and imply that her success depended on being friendly with him. When Nora reported the behavior to human resources, everything changed overnight. Suddenly her code had problems that never existed before. Her ideas were dismissed as impractical. Whispers followed her through the office, painting her as difficult, attention-seeking, someone who could not handle normal workplace banter. Within 6 months, she was pushed out, her reputation in tatters before her career had truly begun. A pattern in the Kadesh vowed never to let that happen again. If she made herself unremarkable, forgettable, perhaps she could have a career built solely on the quality of her work. She would be a ghost in the machine, leaving behind brilliant code, but no memory of the person who created it. What Nora did not know was that someone had been watching very carefully. Daniel Morrison, the 33-year-old CEO and founder of Sterling Tech, had built his company from nothing through a combination of technical genius and strategic thinking. He reviewed every major project personally, and over the past 6 months, he noticed something strange. Richard Grant's submissions showed a dramatic improvement in sophistication, using techniques and approaches that seemed beyond Richard's previous capabilities. Daniel began digging deeper, examining metadata on files, checking revision histories, and cross-referencing email timestamps. The pattern became clear. Every brilliant breakthrough Richard presented on Monday had been created by someone else earlier in the week. The original files traced back to a single workstation in the server room, belonging to an employee Daniel had never actually met, someone named Nora Bennett. The summons on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. Nora was deep in concentration, solving a particularly complex problem involving quantum encryption protocols. She had been working on it for 3 days, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee, and the satisfaction of watching her solution take shape. The code was poetry, each line flowing into the next with perfect logic. A notification popped up on her screen, making her jump. It was from the executive floor, something that had never happened before. The message was simple and terrifying. "Miss Bennett, please report to CEO Morrison's office at 4 this afternoon." "This is not optional. Daniel Morrison." Nora's hands began to shake. In 4 years at Sterling Tech, she had never been summoned anywhere. She had never even been to the executive floor. Her mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Had she made a mistake in her code? Had someone discovered she was the real source of Richard's success? Was she being fired? She glanced at the clock. It was 3:15. She had 45 minutes to prepare for a meeting she did not understand, with a man whose reputation for brilliance intimidated her more than anything else. Daniel Morrison was known for seeing through deception, for understanding systems both technical and human with unsettling clarity. The long walk at exactly 4, Nora stepped into the elevator that led to the executive suite. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored walls and barely recognized the person staring back. The oversized hoodie made her look shapeless, the cap hid most of her face, and her posture screamed of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. This was who she had become, a woman erased. The executive floor was nothing like the development level. Here, floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. Art hung on walls, real paintings that probably cost more than Nora made in a year. Everything spoke of success, confidence, and power. Daniel Morrison's assistant, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, smiled warmly and gestured toward a large wooden door. "Go right in, Miss Bennett. He's expecting you." Nora pushed open the door and stepped into an office that took her breath away. One entire wall was glass, offering an unobstructed view of the Seattle skyline. The other walls held whiteboards covered in equations and architectural drawings. Bookshelves overflowed with technical manuals and philosophy texts. And behind a massive desk sat Daniel Morrison himself. The man who saw everything stood when she entered, and Nora was struck by how different he looked from his corporate photos. Tall and lean, with dark hair that needed a cut and sharp green eyes that seemed to analyze everything they saw. He wore jeans and the button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking more like a graduate student than a CEO worth hundreds of millions. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." His voice was calm, but carried an intensity that made Nora nervous. She perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, still wearing her cap and hoodie like armor. Daniel sat down across from her, and for a long moment, he simply studied her with those penetrating green eyes. Nora forced herself not to look away, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Finally, he spoke, and his words changed everything. "I have spent the last 2 months investigating something that troubled me deeply. I have discovered that Richard Grant has been systematically stealing your work and presenting it as his own. Every major advancement our security division has made in the past year came from you, not him. I have proof, documentation, everything I need. What I do not have is an explanation for why you have allowed this to continue. So I am asking you directly, Nora Bennett, why have you been hiding?" The truth unravels. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. Her carefully constructed world of invisibility was crumbling in real time, and she had no script for this moment. Daniel Morrison sat across from her, patient but expectant, waiting for an answer she had never prepared to give. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "How did you find out?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. "I review all major project submissions personally. About 6 months ago, I noticed that Richard's work suddenly became exponentially more sophisticated. The coding style changed, The problem-solving approaches were completely different from anything he had done before. So I started looking at the metadata, the file creation timestamps, the revision histories. Everything pointed back to you. He pulled out a tablet and slid it across the desk. On the screen, Nora saw her own code, side by side with Richard's presentations. The evidence was irrefutable. I even found emails where Richard asked you to explain your solutions to him, claiming he needed to understand them better for documentation purposes. He was studying your work so he could present it convincingly. Nora stared at the tablet, feeling a strange mix of validation and fear. Someone had finally seen the truth, but what would that mean for her survival here? Breaking the silence, Miss Bennett, I need you to help me understand why you allowed this to happen, Daniel said gently. You are clearly one of the most talented developers I have ever encountered. Your quantum encryption work is groundbreaking. Why would you let someone else take credit? The question hung in the air between them. Nora could deflect, make excuses, try to minimize everything. But sitting in this office with this man who had done the work to discover the truth, she found herself too tired to keep lying, because speaking up at my last job destroyed everything, she said quietly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I worked at a startup in Portland right after college. I was good at my job, and I thought that was enough. But the founder decided my appearance mattered more than my code. He made advances, inappropriate comments, suggestions about how I could advance my career through him other than my work. Daniel's expression darkened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. When I reported it to human resources, I became the problem. Suddenly my work was never good enough, my ideas were impractical, and people whispered about me being difficult and unable to handle professional environments. I was 22 years old, and I watched my reputation get destroyed because I dared to exist as both competent and female. So when I came here, I decided to remove one of those variables. If people could not see me, they could not reduce me to just a body. They would have to judge only my work. An unexpected Proposaldinil was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had shared. When he spoke again, his voice carried both anger at what had happened to her and determination about what came next. What happened to you at that startup was illegal and wrong, and I am sorry you had to survive that. But Nora, your solution was to punish yourself. You made yourself invisible, gave away your accomplishments, and let someone else build a career on your brilliance. That is not survival. That is slow erasure. The words hit Nora like a physical blow because they were true. She had been erasing herself, one oversized hoodie at a time, one stolen project after another. I have a proposal for you, Daniel continued, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. In 3 weeks, Sterling Tech is sponsoring the International Cybersecurity Summit at the Grand Hyatt. Every major player in our industry will be there. Investors, tech leaders, journalists, innovators from around the world. I want you to attend as our lead developer. I want you to present your quantum encryption work to the industry. Your name, your face, your achievement. Nora felt panic rising in her chest like a tidal wave. I cannot do that. I do not do public speaking. I do not do presentations. That is not who I am. It is not who you have allowed yourself to be, Daniel corrected gently. But I have read your code, Nora. I have seen the elegance of your solutions, the creativity in your approaches. Someone with that kind of mind, that kind of vision, does not lack the ability to communicate. You have just been too afraid to try. The weight of choice. Nora stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You do not understand. If I do what you are asking, if I step into that spotlight, everything I have built here to protect myself falls apart. People will look at me, make assumptions, reduce everything I have accomplished to how I look. I have worked so hard to avoid that. Daniel stood as well, moving around his desk until he was closer to her, though still respecting her space. Or they will see a brilliant developer who is revolutionizing cybersecurity. They will see someone with ideas that could change our entire industry. Yes, some people will notice that you are also an attractive woman. But Nora, you cannot control what other people see or think. You can only control whether you show up as your authentic self or continue hiding from a world that needs what you have to offer. What about Richard? Nora asked, deflecting because it was easier than facing the real question. Richard will be terminated tomorrow morning, Daniel said flatly. I have already prepared the documentation. Intellectual property theft is grounds for immediate dismissal, and I will make sure his actions are known in the industry. He will not do this to anyone else, but that is separate from what I am asking you to do. I am not asking you to expose Richard or get revenge. I am asking you to step into your own accomplishments, to claim your work, and to stop being afraid of being seen. A neighbor's wisdom. Nora left Daniel's office with his proposal ringing in her ears. She had 48 hours to give him an answer. The walk to her small apartment in Capitol Hill felt longer than usual. Her mind spun with possibilities and fears, unable to settle on any clear decision. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, fumbling with her keys, and nearly dropped them when a voice called out from the neighboring doorway. Child, you look like you are carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in her doorway, a tiny woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had lived in the building for decades and had adopted Nora as an unofficial granddaughter from the day she moved in. Just work stuff, Nora mumbled, trying to escape into her apartment. Work stuff does not make someone look like they have seen a ghost. Come inside. I just made empanadas. Nora knew better than to refuse. Minutes later, she sat in Mrs. Rodriguez's cozy kitchen, surrounded by plants and family photos, pouring out the entire story. She told her about the stolen work, about Daniel's discovery, about the summit invitation that terrified her. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded on the table. When Nora finished, the older woman reached across and squeezed her fingers gently. Words that changed everything. When I was young, I wanted to be a doctor, Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. But in those days, women from my background did not become doctors. So I became a nurse instead, and I was good at it. But I always wondered what I could have accomplished if I had been brave enough to try for what I actually wanted instead of settling for what felt safe. She looked directly into Nora's eyes. You remind me of myself at your age. Smart, capable, and terrified of taking up space in the world. But here is what I learned too late. Playing small does not protect you from pain. It just guarantees you will never know your own power. This man, this Daniel, he's giving you a chance to stop hiding. Maybe it is time to find out who Nora Bennett really is when she stops running from herself. The decision that night. Nora lay awake staring at her ceiling. She thought about all the code she had written, all the problems she had solved, all the brilliance she had given away. She thought about the young woman she had been at 22, full of confidence until the world punished her for it. And she thought about who she might become if she finally stopped hiding. By the time dawn broke over Seattle, painting her apartment in shades of gold and pink, Nora had made her decision. She showered, dressed in her usual oversized clothes, and headed to Sterling Tech earlier than usual. But this time, instead of heading to her desk, she went straight to the executive floor. Daniel's assistant was surprised to see her at 7 in the morning, but gestured her toward his office. Daniel looked up from his computer, clearly having been there 4 hours already, and something like hope flickered across his face. I will do it, Nora said before she could lose her courage. I will present at the summit, but I need you to understand something. I am terrified. I might mess this up. I might embarrass both of us, but I am tired of being invisible. I am tired of giving away pieces of myself to feel safe. So yes, I will go. I will present my work. And I will try to remember that being smart and being seen do not have to be mutually exclusive. Daniel smiled, genuine warmth transforming his usually serious face. You could never embarrass me, Nora, and I promise, I will support you through every step of this. You are not doing this alone. Transformation begins next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Daniel assigned Nora a presentation coach, a woman named Jennifer, who specialized in helping technical experts communicate their work to broader audiences. Jennifer was patient and encouraging, helping Nora craft a presentation that was both accessible and intellectually rigorous. But the harder work was the internal transformation. Daniel also connected Nora with a stylist named Carmen, explaining that while her work would speak for itself, feeling confident in how she presented herself would only help. Nora was hesitant at first, but Carmen understood immediately what she needed. "You have been hiding," Carmen said during their first meeting, looking at Nora's oversized hoodie and cap. "But we are not going to create a costume for you. We are going to help you dress like the accomplished professional you actually are, comfortable, confident, and authentically you." They shopped together, choosing clothes that fit properly without being overly formal or feminine, if that made Nora uncomfortable. Tailored blazers in deep blues and grays, professional blouses that were elegant without being revealing, well-fitted trousers that looked polished. Carmen taught Nora how to style her hair in ways that were professional but not severe, how to use minimal makeup to look polished without feeling masked. The night of the summer tour, the evening of the summit, Nora stood in her apartment, looking at her reflection, and barely recognized herself. She wore a charcoal grey blazer over a silk blouse in deep emerald, fitted black trousers, and simple heels. Her dark blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and subtle makeup highlighted her features without hiding them. She looked professional, confident, and most importantly, she looked like herself, the real version she had been hiding for years. When Daniel arrived to pick her up, his reaction made her heart skip. He stood in her doorway, looking impossibly sharp in a tailored navy suit, and for a long moment, he simply stared. "Nora," he breathed, and there was genuine wonder in his voice. "You look absolutely incredible." The Grand Hyatt ballroom glittered with lights and possibility. Hundreds of people filled the space, all leaders in cybersecurity and technology. Nora's instinct was to find a corner and disappear, but Daniel stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring. Throughout the evening, he introduced her not as his employee, but as Sterling Tech's lead developer, the brilliant mind behind their revolutionary quantum encryption protocols. And when people asked about her work, Nora found herself explaining her ideas with growing confidence. These people listened, asked intelligent questions, and treated her innovations with respect. When it came time for her presentation, Nora walked to the stage with her heart pounding. She looked out at hundreds of faces and felt the familiar panic rising. Then she caught Daniel's eye in the front row. He nodded once, a small gesture of encouragement and belief. Nora took a breath and began to speak. She talked about encryption, about quantum computing challenges, about the elegant solution she had developed. Her passion for the work came through in every word, and the audience leaned forward, captivated not just by the technology, but by the brilliant woman explaining it. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, and Nora realized with shock that she was receiving a standing ovation, not for being pretty or charming or any of the things she had feared would overshadow her work, but for being exceptional at what she did. As she left the stage, Daniel was waiting. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "That was everything I knew you could be." And for the first time in years, Nora believed him. She had stepped into the light and discovered that being seen did not diminish her brilliance. It amplified it. Monday morning reckoning. Monday, following the summit, felt different from every other Monday in Nora's 4 years at Sterling Tech. She walked through the lobby at her normal time, but this time wearing tailored grey trousers and a fitted navy blazer. Her hair flowed loose around her shoulders, and she made eye contact with colleagues who passed by. Some did double takes, others whispered, but Nora kept walking with her head held high. The entire company had received an email over the weekend announcing an emergency meeting at 9 in the main conference room. Attendance was mandatory for all development team members and executives. Nora knew what was coming, and while nervousness fluttered in her stomach, it was no longer the paralyzing fear that had controlled her for so long. She arrived at the conference room to find it already filling with people. Curious glances followed her as she walked to the front, where Daniel stood with the company's legal counsel and head of human resources. Richard Grant sat alone on one side of the table, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Justice served at exactly 9. Daniel called the meeting to order. His voice carried the authority that had built Sterling Tech into an industry leader, but also an edge of controlled anger that made everyone sit up straighter. Thank you all for coming. This meeting concerns a serious matter of intellectual property theft and corporate fraud that has been occurring within our development division. He opened a folder and spread documents across the table. For the past 18 months, Richard Grant has been systematically stealing work produced by Nora Bennett and presenting it as his own. Every major advancement Richard has claimed credit for, including the encryption protocols that won us the Anderson contract, the security architecture for the banking sector project, and the quantum computing innovations presented at this weekend's summit, were created by Nora. The room erupted in whispers. Colleagues turned to look at Nora with a mixture of shock and reassessment. Richard's face flushed deep red, then drained to a sickly pale. Daniel continued, his voice cutting through the noise. I have email trails showing Richard requesting explanations of Nora's code under the guise of needing documentation. I have metadata proving when files were originally created and by whom. I have testimony from IT about file access patterns. The evidence is conclusive and has been reviewed by our legal team. Standing in Truffrickard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. This is ridiculous. Nora worked under my supervision. Any work she did was part of my team's output. That is how corporate hierarchy functions. That is not how intellectual property works, Daniel replied coldly. And that is certainly not how ethics work. You knowingly took credit for innovations you did not create, accepted bonuses and recognition based on stolen work, and allowed a talented developer to remain invisible while you built a reputation on her brilliance. That ends today. He turned to address the full room. Richard Grant is terminated from Sterling Tech effective immediately. Security will escort him from the building. Furthermore, I have reported this matter to the Industry Ethics Board. His actions will have professional consequences beyond this company. Richard looked around the room desperately, seeking sympathy or support, but found none. His eyes landed on Nora, and for a moment, his expression twisted with anger. You could have said something years ago. You let this happen by staying silent. For the first time, Nora spoke, her voice clear and steady. No, Richard, you made a choice to steal. I made a choice to survive in the only way I thought I could after my previous workplace punished me for being visible. Those are not the same thing. You built your career on my work while knowing exactly what you were doing. I hope you learn what actual integrity looks like. But that is no longer my concern. Parts to coming soon.